Figured what I would do is give a quick introduction of who I am. Obviously there's a bio online, so I'll make it brief. But I'm Bryan Hara. I'm Executive Director of both Greater China and Southeast Asia on both the brand development and the brand deployment side, so both Anthem and Shock. I've been doing this role for quite a bit of time. I've been in Shock for over 11 years, always involved in the Asian part of town. So what I'm going to cover today is where did my design go? And I'm just going to talk about both good and bad examples of where design localization have occurred, the reasons that they've occurred, and some things that we've seen in the market. Obviously some things that we've done, but a lot of things that we've seen in the market where people have done it right, or how you can go ahead and do it right. So what I'm going to do is it's kind of broken into a few different sections. And we typically find that in localizing design that there's three areas sort of under your control where there can be some variability that occurs. First is in design localization. I have a sort of a better slide for that here. First is design localization, then is in the translation process, and finally is in the execution or the deployment process. These are the three areas where things are under your control. And of course, there's one area that is not under your control, which is the final point you see here, third-party intrusion, and that's basically counterfeiting. You know, brands tend to take a life of their own on, and when you have multiple people in the process touching the product branding, and you expand this over markets and countries and time zones and languages, and obviously there's a lot of areas where things can sort of go awry. So that's what we're going to cover. And I'm going to start here on the design localization section. So the first place where things can kind of go a little goofy is in just overall translating your brand. And we have a really good example here on this slide. Obviously, we all know who, or many of us on this webcast know who Ernie the Elf is. However, just imagine if you're someone who's never seen Ernie the Elf before, as Keebler recently had a situation in mainland China where they wanted to bring him in. To a Chinese person, what is this little mythical character in a hollow, rotted-out tree making my cookies and my biscuits and my crackers? What does that mean? And how is that translated? It's very, very difficult to translate something like that. There's this history and this legacy, which is, you can't just stick a name on it and expect people to understand it. The second place where we often find that design localization can kind of hit a snag is with local marketing departments. And I think this is not just an Asian thing. It's clearly not a developed marketing thing. It's a global thing. When we have local marketing departments who touch a brand, oftentimes they feel the need to, and rightfully so in many cases, to put their stamp on it to justify their position and add some modifications. And typically when you're dealing in a marketplace where people understand the brand and the brand legacy, this can be done with little issue. But when you, of course, add people who don't really understand the brand, don't have the legacy, and in a place like Asia where the average turnover of a marketing employee is 2 years, you often have people who don't even understand the brand that they're working on, or by the time they understand the brand, then they move. And so the types of changes that can be recommended and ultimately take place oftentimes are far outside what we believe is an acceptable change. The final piece here is cost considerations. Especially in developing markets, price trumps just about everything. And it doesn't matter if the company is a multinational or is a local company. My experience has been that multinationals that operate in China or Thailand or Vietnam, in many cases they may have a multinational name tied to them, but they act much like a local company. So in these cases, you have marketing folks who almost take on roles of purchasing people. And they take on these roles of purchasing people because they don't have a choice. They have a limited budget, and therefore they have to make every penny count. And as a result, oftentimes they will go to cost over the quality. And of course this is going to cause issues. They'll reduce the number of colors, they will use different substrate, be it paper or plastic of a lower grade, that obviously will have effect to how that brand is translated. So now I'm going to go on to the translation section. This is a more fun section as far as I'm concerned, because we have a lot of really good examples here. This is an area where things often also can fall down, because companies oftentimes say, hey, I'll just transliterate my name. So Coca-Cola is a good example, the one I showed before, Coca-Cola, which means the original translation, which I'll get to in a second. They just translate a name. And it sounds similar. Coca-Cola kind of sounds like Coca-Cola. Or for Kentucky Fried Chicken, Kanduji kind of sounds like Kentucky. These companies, of course, have put some money into it to make sure that even though it's a transliteration, it actually has a good meaning. But there's a lot of companies that haven't done that. They've either just transliterated the name, or they've used the existing name. So this first one, I have a question. How does this brand make you feel? This is one of my favorite ones. This is the Barf brand. Barf is an Iranian company. They are the creators of a lot of household cleaning products. And this is an example of, this is laundry detergent. In Farsi, the language of Iran, it means snow. And so it's a great meaning for that market. But when they decided to extend it out into Europe, specifically Eastern Europe, but some Western European countries where there are English speakers, obviously the lack of translating this brand causes big issues for them. Another good example is this next one I'm going to show you. Does this brand make you feel safe? This is an Italian car company. This example is a bit old, but I guess it lets you all understand that this has been going on for quite some time, and clearly it's not easy to do. People have had issues localizing design for many, many years, and it continues. So this is the Lancia Dedra. So Lancia, again, is an Italian car company, and Dedra in Italian actually doesn't really mean anything. But when they attempted, and this product was actually a really high seller in Italy, but when they released it into the UK, they had obviously big problems because no one wants to be in a car that starts with the word dead in it. So this is a good example of just leaving the name as is a problem. My last example here is a kind of a funny one. This is one from Kentucky Fried Chicken. So there's a funny story around this. Kentucky Fried Chicken has a really good history when localizing their brand, specifically in mainland China. And they are, in many ways, the gold standard for how to do it right. But this example shows that the process of doing this right is still fraught with landmines everywhere, and everyone has a chance to stumble. It's just not easy. So a few years ago, they decided that they wanted to translate finger licking good. And the decision was made to translate it, and it was done pretty literally. And when reading it in local language in Mandarin, it roughly translates more into eat your fingers off than finger licking good. So clearly a problem. And obviously they fixed this. So the last point in the process where we find there are issues that can occur in successful design localization is in the execution or the deployment phase. I think this is where most changes occur. And most changes occur here because you're dealing with an extended supply chain, and you're dealing with folks who are not so involved in the branding side, specifically printers. And oftentimes printers have no idea about the brand and what we're hoping to achieve with that brand. And so as a result, a lot of errors and modifications occur in this phase. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of marketing folks, because of low budgets, are asked to do a lot more things than we may normally have in a European or North American marketplace. And because of this, oftentimes we have marketers who are dealing specifically in choosing printers, and this is clearly not their skill set. Their skill set is understanding the brand and understanding how to make that work in the local market and doing the right promotions and so on and so forth, not choosing the right printer. But because this often happens, we have marketing folks who either choose the wrong printer because they don't understand the specs involved, or oftentimes they'll then push it forward to someone else. And who's the next logical person to push this off to? It would be the product manufacturer, regardless if it's the company's own factory or they have a third-party manufacturer. Obviously, a third-party manufacturer or the company's manufacturer, they are going to do what they do best, and they're going to focus on what they know how to do. And oftentimes that's hitting budget and or maximizing profit, which can be the same thing sometimes. And the third thing is hitting timelines. So as a result, we're often dealing with printers who don't have the right capability, the right capacity, or the know-how to do things right and to do things the way that they were intended. As a result, we've seen all sorts of crazy stuff happen. We've seen the simple stuff is things like seeing metallic colors, like a metallic silver color, is converted into a gray, so there's no shininess to it, but it's cheaper. We've seen printers who put less ink on the paper or the plastic because, again, it saves them ink costs. We've seen substrate used that's weaker or of lower quality. We've seen colors to use less ink. Again, they've converted colors. They've made it, instead of putting 6 colors on a package, they change the makeup of the ink so there's only 4 colors. And so that saves them cost. We've seen some really crazy stuff. I remember a few years ago I saw one where the printer, they had the UPC code, the barcode, and it still had FPO, which means for position only, on the barcode. It was not scannable because they did not replace in the correct barcode. We have seen issues where because of the way that the artwork is created, you have multiple layers on the artwork, and you can turn the layer on or you can turn it off depending on the market. And we've seen packaging for the US market that was supposed to only be in English but had Spanish in the package. We've seen German for an Asian market package because the printer they didn't really understand how to use the software. They incorrectly played around with the files, and there were issues there. And then one of the worst ones that I've seen in very recent memory was a retail client of ours that we were not involved in the back end of the process. We were only involved in the design area, not in the deployment phase. And the deployment was done in Asia, and it was flawless execution. The package looked wonderful. The colors popped. They looked great. The substrate looked, nice. It got on the shelf, and it was a seasonal item. It got on the shelf, and while the shipping occurred, the substrate fell apart, so that they had boxes that were falling apart on the shelf. And when you touched the package with your fingers, the ink actually rubbed off. And as a result, the client had to literally scrap an entire item, and it was a very high-selling item for this seasonal project, and it was obviously a big problem. So I liken the deployment phase to sort of like running a marathon. You can train and you can run, and if you stop a mile or a kilometer before the finish line, you've lost. It doesn't matter all the prep work that you've done, you still are not going to finish. And so this part of the process is obviously highly important because we put a lot of money into strategy and design and creative, and it's a shame to see it fall apart in the last phase. Here's another example of something that went wrong. This one's a bit harder to see, but on the left, actually, I should show quickly the previous example. The top picture is the proof. That's what the printer was to follow. The bottom is what was actually printed, so you can see the blue is a little darker on the notebook. The orange color that's supposed to be on the bottom panel looks almost frosted, where on the sample, the higher sample, it was a much stronger, deeper orange color. This is another example. You can see the reds between these two packages. The one on the left is the target, is much redder and deeper. The printer put down less ink, and as a result, it doesn't look as strong. And there were some problems also with this. There's a vignette behind the stamper, and you can see the hard lines. And so obviously that's a problem when that gets to shelf. So I've shown you some examples of where design localization have gone wrong. And we're looking at these two examples, and my question to you is, have these gone wrong or have they gone right? And I think we're beginning to get into the point of where design localization is, it's not so easy. There's no real sort of simple answer how to do it right. So the example on the left is a SCJ example, SC Johnson Wax. Several years ago, they decided to do a global rebrand for Glade. This is for Glade. We assisted them with this project, and if you look at this package, you can see the global elements, which are the lemon tree. You can see the citrus, fresh citrus. That's the sort of the flavor, the scent. That's all done to the global standard. The way that they've done Glade, it's the upper left, the blue in the blue. That's in Korean. That says Glade. That's all the global standard, and that looks, to the Western eyes, that looks wonderful. If you look at the upper right-hand panel, you can see there's a little boy sitting on a toilet seat with his pants down around his ankles. Now again, to a Western perspective, this is craziness. This doesn't make sense and clearly looks off-brand. SEJ is in a very enviable position. They're one of the first U.S. multinational companies. They opened up their first international office in the UK in 1914. They were in Australia in 1917 and quickly grew into Asia. So they are a brand that has a tremendous amount of legacy and knowledge and within the consumer set. They know who S.C. Johnson Wax is. Their parents, their grandparents, they've all grown up with it. So they actually have a brand that speaks to the local market. And when they opened up many, many years ago, they took a very local approach, which having a boy on a toilet seat was completely normal. And as they have grown and they've evolved their brand, they've been able to keep that element in. They're known for that for Glade. And this actually makes a lot of sense. They're meeting the global look and they're meeting the local look. And they've done a wonderful job merging it. The second example is even harder to see that it's a good example. This is Febreze and it's for Japan. And for Procter & Gamble, which is Febreze is one of their brands, this is one of their most successful brands in Japan. And they've done a wonderful job with it for a few reasons. If we look at this is their website, the front website page. You look at the top left example, sorry, the top right example, that's the US page, obviously. If you look at the bottom right example, this is the Japanese page. And I question if anyone can find anything related here. There's no Febreze on the Japanese page. The colors are different. Even the bottle shape basically looks different. So at first glance, this looks completely different. But actually, this is a really, really wonderful example. What Procter & Gamble has figured out with Febreze is not only to modify the art and the look and feel of the product for the client and the consumer in Japan to meet their needs. They've actually also changed the product attributes. So in the US market, I think most of us know Febreze as a product that we use to disguise the odor of our clothes. In Japan, it's used for a completely different thing. In Japan, in the summertime especially, it gets very, very humid. And so as a result, there's musty smells in their rooms and in their cars. And they want to get that out. And the Japanese are, again, it's a stereotype, but they're quite meticulous and very clean. And so they don't use Febreze to disguise the odor of a product. They actually clean the issue. They clean whatever the odor is coming from. They kill it. And then they use Febreze for a good scent. So the client here has figured out, Procter & Gamble here has figured out not only how to change the look and feel, but also the product attributes to meet their local market. So again, this is a really good example of localization. It really speaks to the Japanese market. And this has been quite successful for them. So now I'm going to go into some positive examples, things where localization has been done right. And we're going to start with design localization and as it relates to the brand. This is Kentucky Fried Chicken again, and this is a Chinese example again. I'm using a lot of Chinese examples here because that's where the sort of the richest and best examples come from. Kentucky Fried Chicken has done a wonderful, wonderful job, as I mentioned before, of localizing. And of course they have issues, as everyone does, but they have done a great job of localizing. They have done it in a few ways. The first way is they altered their logo to have a more Asian look and feel. The kernel looks a bit more Asian. They have modified their product, their food offering. So yes, they have fried chicken, as we know, in the North American market, but they have also added things like shrimp burgers. They have soy milk drinks, egg tarts, which meet the local taste. They have in their senior management several individuals who are Chinese nationals, but spent a significant amount of time in North America to understand the brand legacy and what the brand is going after, and then they put them back into China. So instead of just sort of throwing the brand over the fence, they took people who truly understood the brand, moved them to the market to have that brand knowledge, and then apply it to the local area. And then finally, like any good brand does, they've evolved with the times. When Kentucky Fried Chicken opened up in China, they were selling a Western product. And at the time, in the mid-'80s, this was a wonderful thing to do. Chinese wanted to touch the West. But the Chinese, like any other market in the world, has developed and changed. And now a very, very big issue in China is fighting obesity, specifically childhood obesity. And so Kentucky Fried Chicken have done a wonderful job of changing their look and feel to meet a more healthy, conscious consumer. So they've done a really good job here. And the success is very telling in the numbers. So in China, they have approximately 3,900 restaurants. And you compare that to McDonald's in the same country, and it's about double, which is opposite the way it normally is in the world. The 3,900 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants in China drive more sales for Yum Brands than all 19,000 restaurants in the U.S. So clearly this is a success story. They've really figured out how to do it. And I have a sort of an interesting story of my own. So I've told the China version. When I lived in China about 10 years ago for several years, and I had several friends, and one of my friends was Korean, and I had first gotten to China, and he said, we're going to take you, him and the rest of his Korean friends said, we're going to take you to our favorite restaurant. It's called KFC, and it's a real taste of Korea. I said, what do you mean? It's Kentucky Fried Chicken. They said, no. It's called Korean Fried Chicken. So in the Korean market, actually, Kentucky Fried Chicken has done such a great job with localizing also to that market that the people there actually believe it's a Korean brand and not a U.S. brand, which is quite interesting. We'll move on to the translation part. These are some good examples of translations. So the first one here is for Groupon. This is obviously a very relevant and new example. So Groupon in China, when translating their name, they did two good things, which need to be done when translating a name into any language, of course. One, you hope that you can sound similar to what your brand name is in the local language, the originating local language. And the second one, obviously, is it has a positive meaning, at least unlike the barf example, not a negative meaning. So Groupon is a great example. In Chinese, Groupon is Gao Peng. So Gao Peng, Groupon, it's pretty similar. The second one is the way it translates. So Gao is the character for hi, Peng is the character for friend. Together it sort of means distinguished friend or distinguished guest. And it's part of a longer phrase, which is sort of a phrase used in China, which refers to you can only do great business or have successful business when having great friends or great guests involved. All the parties are good. So they actually picked off a phrase, which a piece of a larger phrase, which means success in essence, and it sounds like Groupon. So this is really a well done translation for them. The second one is a Coca-Cola, which I just alluded to. I'm sure many of you have heard this one before. Coca-Cola, when they originally opened up in China in 1928, they roughly translated the name so it would sound like Coca-Cola. So the original translation before it went to market was Coca-Cola. Sounds like Coca-Cola. But roughly translated means biting the wax tadpole. So the meaning is not so good. It's not bad, but there's no meaning. They invested a very little bit of money, and before they released their product into the Chinese market, they changed the name from Coca-Cola to Coca-Cola. Very small change in sound, but it changes the meaning dramatically, which means makes you and your mouth happy, or makes your mouth happy and makes you happy. So again, a wonderful job there for translating. And the final one is the deployment piece that I'm going to cover, examples of good deployment. I don't have any photos of it in the slide here because good deployment should look like good deployment. It should look the way you expect it to look. So as it relates to deploying right and getting things right on the deployment side, we believe that you can't forget about that last stage in the process. And so that last stage, that deployment stage, should be included in having the right people to assist to do it, having the budgets to do it, choosing the right vendors who can do the execution correctly, giving them tools, giving guidelines for color and substrate, instructions about what the brand is to look like and to feel like, and what you can compromise and what you can't compromise. You would be surprised how many times brands are literally thrown over the fence. Here's a PDF, make it look the same. No color guidelines, no brand guidelines, no nothing. And then, of course, wherever possible, policing the process. Because printers are just like printers anywhere else in the world. You make money by getting as much printed as quickly as possible. And same thing with product vendors. Again, they don't really know what they're doing. They're focused on making the product, not on the artwork. So you need to have people who can help police and follow up on the process. So we're going to talk about the fourth piece, excuse me, of this, which is third-party intrusion, which is just a fancy way of calling it counterfeiting. Once that product artwork is in your market, and when I say in your market, I am not referring to on the shelf. I am referring to in the market. it is important that it's controlled completely. You would be surprised how often artwork, specifically in developing countries, gets to counterfeiters by the client, not by it already being on shelf. So we've had multiple examples where we've worked in places with certain clients where maybe the annual household income of that employee is $5,000 US, and a counterfeiter will pay them $5,000 US for that artwork file. So all they have to do is give that artwork file over to that counterfeiter, and they've doubled their salary for the year. And it happens a lot. So as a result, you have a lot of issues with spotting, with counterfeiting. So we're going to show you two examples here. This first one is for Apple. Of course, everyone's heard of it. I want everyone to take a guess. Is this an actual Apple store in China? Or is this an actual Apple store in China? I'll give you the look of the first one again. Apple? Or Apple? So it happens that the one that we're looking at right now is the fake. It's still, it looks very similar. The product is laid out the same way. You can look on the right-hand side of the frame. You can see an Apple poster. It's lit well. It's white. You know, we look at the first example again. Looks very simple, very similar. The wood is used, and in fact, the flooring in this Apple store is, I believe, carpeted, which is actually not as nice as the wooden floor in the fake. So counterfeits are abounding here, and they can come out in all sorts of ways. As I've mentioned, the first one is that, you know, from the client side, handing over these files is financially beneficial, the artwork, and that can cause problems. We have a client that we worked with, still work with, that was using a printer that they worked with for about 20 years. It was their largest printer in northern China. And they found out after about 20 years of work that this printer was running 3 shifts. First 2 for the client, third one for the counterfeiters. So at about 1 a.m., the presses went back on, and from 1 to 6 a.m. they were printing just counterfeit product. And as a result, there was product that got on the shelf, and this is a good example here. This is a Head & Shoulders example. Again, spot the fake, which is the real one, which is the fake one. Pretty hard to tell. The one on the right happens to be the real version. This is product that got shipped from China, went into Canada, got smuggled over an Indian reservation that was on the border of Canada and the US, and ended up on shelf in New Jersey. And people with weak immune systems who used this product ended up going to the hospital because it was causing significant problems for them. So this is a real issue, and it's not just in the local market, be it China or India. This can go anywhere. And of course, once the product is on shelf, so forget about the printers or the people within your own company who can send the files to counterfeiters. Once it's on the shelf, of course, someone can scan it, they can redraw the artwork, so on and so forth. So this is a real problem. The final one is diversion, where a product may be meant for the Russian market is smuggled into the German market. Or, as we see a lot, a Chinese product is smuggled into Russia or some places in Southeast Asia. It's sold for less in China than it is in those other countries. It can be diverted to another country and sold at a higher profit margin. So, China holds a significant amount of counterfeiting sales worldwide. So, counterfeiting is about a 400 to 500 billion sale market industry globally. It's hard to get exact numbers. It accounts for about 10% of all CPGs, consumer product companies, lost sales. And the hardest markets hit by counterfeiting are in the US, which loses about 225 billion, and the EU loses about 115 billion a year. 50 to 60% of this product comes from China. So most of the examples I'm going to be showing here are Chinese examples. Now, a lot of the people involved with doing counterfeiting are organized crime. And it's pretty simple. If you're running organized crime, and let's say you're in the drug trade, your margins on heroin are between 100 and 200%. Your margins on counterfeiting Head & Shoulders or Coca-Cola could be 300 or 400%. And of course, if you're caught, you get slapped on the hand, maybe you get fined. If you're caught for selling heroin, you're put to death. So from an organized crime perspective, this is actually a wonderful market to be in. And as a result, since maybe 2005 to 2006, we've seen a massive shift of counterfeit products from luxury products like luxury purses and DVDs, movies, to things like baby formula, golf clubs. I've seen Tiffany's jewelry in fake blue boxes. And most recently, there's a high amount of aircraft and helicopter and car parts, which obviously is clearly an issue when that gets put in your aviation or your car vehicle. So this is obviously a big deal. Now, China has, in many ways, really tightened down on how counterfeiting is allowed to happen. It still goes on, but it's a lot less than it was 5 years ago. But counterfeiters are smart. So this is something that's going on a lot in the Chinese market currently, which is copycatting. The brand on the left is Omo. We don't see a lot of Omo in North America. It's really a European brand for Unilever. On the right, this is a copycat. The letters look similar, and again, if you're not an English-speaking person or first language English-speaking person, doesn't make a lot of it. Neither word makes any sense, and it looks pretty similar. And the Chinese government has yet to sort of put laws around copycatting. Here's Tide. This is another great example. Looks real close. The one on the left obviously is the real one, and the two on the right are a little different. But if you don't have any brand history or legacy or understanding, you've never seen this brand before, it clearly could fool you. Colgate. Now we're getting on to one that's a little bit more scary because this goes in your mouth. I would actually make the argument to you that the fake looks better than the real one. No insult to Colgate, of course, but they're using a metallized embossing on the package, so it shines a little bit more. It might pop a little bit more, but in essence, it is a fake product, and there is not real Colgate. Now, it might be real toothpaste, but it's not Colgate toothpaste. So obviously, it's problematic. And then the final one is Oreo. And again, this one looks real close. The photo is pretty similar. The colors are very, very close. And finally, of course, you can see the wording is pretty much spot on there. O-R-D or O-R-E-O. Pretty similar. So getting localization done right, how do you do it? I think it needs to be looked at in the same way, in the same lens as you look through creating a new brand. Because in essence you are. Obviously if it's a product that's been in the market for a while and there's some brand history like Febreze or like SC Johnson wax with the Glade item and some other products that they have in market, it works there because people know the brand. So really when you're introducing a new brand or you're localizing a new flavor, a new type of an existing brand that might not have that history or that legacy, you have to basically start from the ground up and start all over again. You need to make sure that obviously all the elements are thought about. Not only from the design, but the translation's done right, that when it's printed it looks right. All of these things need to be taken into account. And it can't just be local, and it can't just be global. And what I mean to say is there are some products obviously that are working for the local market, and so they want to be very local, and some products are selling a Western market or a European market feel. So again, you have to know what the product and who it's selling to, and then you localize it to match that. I think it's also important on the counterfeiting end that things are being looked at, that things are secure. We looked for a specific client a few years ago about areas in the process where variants can occur and where things can go wrong and where counterfeiting can happen. And we located about 18 different steps from design strategy, or brand strategy I should say, all the way through to the product actually being put on a pallet and being stuck in a boat and coming back to the market for where it's to sale. So it's best to find a way to reduce that variability. There's always going to be variability, but it can be reduced by having a smaller amount of vendors who are managing the process, having people within your own organization who understand the process and they're also managing it instead of just kind of throwing it to other people. And that's really how you do it. But there's not a perfect answer how to do it right. I think the takeaway from this presentation, however, is that it should be truly done in a way that takes into account the product attributes and what the consumer is looking to buy, and really making it meet those needs first, not just throwing a brand over the fence. And that is the presentation. Any questions? I've seen a few before. One of them I saw from Barbara Glass. You are right, Barbara. In the deployment phase, It doesn't matter if it's in China or Malaysia or Indonesia, or if it's in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's important that eyes are put on this part of the process and people are seeing it through to the end. Okay, so Noah has a question about books. So it depends. So Noah's question is regarding the messaging on packaging and if it has to meet the local market. And absolutely it does. Clearly, if it is a product that is being created in China or India and shipped back to the North America or Europe for sale, it needs to meet the requirements of those countries. In Asia, it's a very, very different animal. And every country is different. So we have a lot of clients. Coca-Cola is a good one, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, any of these are good examples of places where they want to do multilingual packaging in the market. So you want to put maybe Chinese, both simplified and traditional, which would cover Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China. You want to put it all in one package, you're only doing one design, you save some money, and you're meeting multiple market needs. But the rules in China are very different than the rules in Taiwan. And so as it relates to legal text, there has to be modifications, and we see that a lot. And so when we deal with translations, we help to manage that part of the process. We typically use 2 or 3 different third-party translators who are bonded and certified, but we have some translators who are doing technical text, some who are doing artistic, more not as literal, but more artistically driven. So you're meeting the needs both to the brand, but you're also meeting the legal requirements, and it's sticky. A country like Thailand has some really interesting laws, and some places where they have not a lot of laws. We might have a lot of regulation in one country. In Thailand, they have no regulation for some things, but for some things we have no regulation around. They have a ton of regulation around. So that's one of the questions. Is the brand experience any different in Asia than in North America? Yes. And I think I need to start your question with, is the brand experience different in Asia than North America? Asia is not a country, right? And sometimes even me, I've spent 10, 15 years involved in Asia, either living there or being involved from North America, and being part of that place. There is no country named Asia. So the consumer experience in Japan is markedly different than the consumer experience in Malaysia or India. I would argue that going into a grocery store in Japan is more of a sensory overload. The colors are brighter, the designs are catchier than in North America or Europe. Japan really, really leads the way. Korea is also very similar. You go to a place like India or Thailand, it's like going to Mexico. It's a developing country, and the look and feel is completely different. So oftentimes when we work with clients regionally, they may have a regional office in, let's say, Hong Kong or Singapore. We deal with them for an overall regional look and feel, but then we have to deal with the local markets because there's very, very different specific things that have to be done to meet those consumer needs. Do I consider translation of a name necessary in China? Yes. In short, absolutely. There are some brands. Okay. I guess I should recalibrate that. It depends what you're selling. If you are selling a Western luxury product, you probably don't need to translate. Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci. And while they do have their names translated into Chinese, they still lead with the English name. Most everyone else, though, needs to have a Chinese name. While there are more English speakers in China than there are in the US, it's only because the country is so much larger and the level of English spoken is not very high. And so if you want the consumer to be able to know, to associate with your brand, they're going to need to know what to call it. And English letters oftentimes will just look like gibberish to them. So I think it's very, very important for translation in China. And any other market. I think there's a lot more English speakers in Thailand, but English is not the #1 language spoken. It's still Thai. Same thing in Vietnam. India, English is fine. Singapore, English is fine. Malaysia, you can get away with it. But every market, again, is a little bit different. Could I speak to the particularities of online within overall branding experience and government-imposed restrictions? Wow, that's a good one. government restrictions are interesting, and again, every country is different. So Japan or Hong Kong, there are no government restrictions on the internet. Malaysia, Singapore, typically what's restricted on the internet is pornography. China has a much larger, and Korea also, no restrictions on internet. China has a significant amount of restrictions. Pornography is out. Most blogs, you can't get access to blogs. It depends. They change back and forth. But sometimes you can get past the front page of CNN or BBC. And often you can surf to the opening page, but you can't get into the next page afterwards. Facebook obviously is, I shouldn't say obviously, but Facebook, sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. It's amazing. I'll have a few days where I have a bunch of friends who use Facebook who are based in China. I get a flurry of messages, and then it goes quiet for 2 months. I think as it relates to a consumer product company, someone who is selling, either food or technology, anyone who's selling to a consumer, government restrictions does not apply. The government is not going to freeze out your website. Obviously, as it relates to social media, it makes things a lot more problematic. As I've already said, Facebook is from time to time on, time to time off. Same thing applies to Twitter. So obviously there are Chinese sites, and there are Chinese areas where people are passing messages in a more legal forum. And so again, it's no different than localizing your brand to the market. You're just localizing your communication to that marketplace. So yes, a place like Twitter or Facebook is not going to work for you in China. But obviously, going with more local means of web communication, it can work. It can work. Are there any other questions from anyone out there? I think one thing to add here is that these markets are changing, and they're changing very, very quickly. I think 5 or 6 years ago, when dealing in China or Malaysia or Thailand or Vietnam, we could typically give a North American or European brand to that market and say, here you go, here it is. And translate it literally and just let it go to market. And it would succeed. And it would succeed because the consumer base was wowed by anything foreign. And these markets are all changing exceedingly quickly. When I started with Shock 11 years ago, we had an office in Shanghai that was 40 people, and 3 of them spoke passable English. We now have an office of over 200 people, and of the 200 people, I'd say 80% speak English conversationally. The market has changed dramatically, and the people's tastes have changed dramatically, and their tastes change significantly quicker than they change here in North America or Europe. So as a result, when looking to localize your brand, it's more than just giving a US or European or North American or European brand some local language and letting it fly. It truly needs to be not only localized to the look and feel, but also the product attributes to that Chinese or Malaysian or Vietnamese market. But conversely, you need to have people who understand that brand and can continue to evolve it and understand the market as it changes. And so it's important that those local marketing organizations understand the legacy of the brand, but of course understand how to execute it. And I'd be happy to give my little quip for Anthem and Shock, but we clearly understand how to do that. We've been in Asia since 1996 and have individuals who do that. Any other questions now that I've done my sales pitch? Right. Well, thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, I know that you can, there are email addresses that you can communicate to. I'm happy to answer questions offline for anyone or get on a phone. I'm in the States here for the rest of the week and then back in Singapore, but I'm always available to answer any questions anyone might have. Thank you very much.